Hello everyone, and welcome back to another instalment of our long-running webinar series. Since we started our webinars in 2017, hundreds of experts have shared their knowledge on many different sustainability topics. Hearing from our experts and experienced guest speakers is a great way to build your sustainability knowledge and help your business succeed sustainably. Terms like biogenic carbon, embodied carbon, and carbon equivalent are clear to some people, yet bamboozling to others. For this webinar, Sarah Downey, Head of Marketing and Communications at Forest and Wood Products Australia, joined Stephen Mitchell, one of our green building experts. They discussed the process of developing 3 carbon guides for a variety of stakeholders. Let's get into it.
Well, hello everyone, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today, Educating Your Stakeholders About Carbon. It's a case study from the Australian timber and forestry industry with Sarah Downey from Forest and Wood Products Australia and myself, Steve Mitchell, Principal Consultant at thinkstep-anz. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Sarah Downey. Welcome, Sarah. Sarah is a head of marketing and communications for Forest and Wood Products Australia, or FWPA. FWPA is a non-profit industry services company that works with its members, government and industry stakeholders to invest in effective and relevant research and development activities. Its members are timber and wood product manufacturers, importers of wood products, and Australian forestry and plantation owners and managers. With that, I'll hand over to Sarah for the first part of the presentation. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Steve, and hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're here to talk about the FWPA Carbon Guide series that we developed with ThinkStep. These guides were really born out of, I guess, the broader conversation at the moment, which we know the Australian government has set very ambitious goals, legislating a 43% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. So I think to achieve these targets, every industry has to play a very active role and work together. We also thought, just to be a part of that broader conversation, we need a shared understanding of what it is exactly we are talking about. This can be a very complex topic. There's many different terms being used, things like what's the difference between embodied carbon and upfront carbon, what is biogenic carbon. So these guides were developed to clarify all of that terminology around carbon and net zero. So whilst that may be familiar to some, it's certainly confusing to many others of us. So we wanted to make sure that we had knowledge and information at hand so that people could learn more. We also wanted to avoid any misinformation out there. So creating a single source of truth was really important. And where we knew that we could trust the information, that it's based on evidence, fact-based information that's written in a way that's really easy to digest and apply. I think also the timber and forestry industry has a big role to play in this conversation. We've got a very compelling and positive story to share when it comes to carbon. And we needed, as an industry, to get better at communicating that message and educating our key stakeholders and all users of forest and wood products. So I think it's just, that's the information there that's to help them understand the impact that we can have on helping reduce embodied carbon emissions simply by choosing different materials when they're building. I think forests are integral to the global carbon cycle, and this is very well known. They are vital carbon sinks and help to offset greenhouse gas emissions. But I think that the rest of the story, in that the carbon is stayed stored in wood products even after harvesting for many decades, whilst that product is in service and even after its disposal. So not many people know that around 50% of the dry mass of wood is actually stored carbon and continues to do so. So I think our industry, as an important contributor to climate change mitigation, we have to help our partners understand our role in this and how we can help them achieve their industry goals and targets. As a major supplier to the construction industry, we know that they're ramping up their efforts to decarbonise. So I think in Australia's built environment, the embodied carbon emissions were estimated to be around 16% in 2019 and are expected to climb to 85% in 2050. So it's vital that we take action and take action together now. And this is where our industry can help bolster their ongoing efforts to reduce emissions by providing timber building materials that are produced from sustainably managed forests. So we can see there that even just 10% more timber used in Australian buildings would actually reduce the annual carbon dioxide emissions by 1 million tonnes. So we know we can have a great impact in this space. The 3 guides that we developed with ThinkStep were actually created each with a clear focus and a key target audience for each one. The first guide that we developed was the Carbon Primer and Glossary, and this was really for the forest and wood products sector company representatives so that they could educate themselves, be clear on the facts, and understand all of the terminology. This was really key to just clarifying all the key concepts, terms, definitions, and it provides information on the frameworks that are shaping the market for forest and wood products, particularly those in construction. The second guide that we produced, this is the third guide that we produced, which is Forest, Plantations, Wood Products and Australia's Carbon Balance. This was really aimed at our policymakers, and this has very easy to understand information that's a credible resource and helps to upskill policymakers on how native forestry, plantations, imported timber and wood products can sustainably meet modern needs of the economy, including the circular economy and various carbon frameworks. And then that third guide that we produced was actually under Forest and Wood Products brand Wood Solutions. Wood Solutions is a very well-known resource for anything to do with timber information. The target audience there is the design and build audience or anyone that uses wood products. And this guide is just a really valuable resource for design professionals that want to specify wood products in their sustainable or zero carbon buildings. Again, it's just got really practical information that explains and clarifies a range of carbon and greenhouse gas emission concepts and just upskills users of wood products and how they can be assessed within the different carbon frameworks.
Thanks, Sarah, for that overview of what the guides are, the target audiences for those, and the introduction. I'm going to talk a little bit now about how the guides were produced and a little bit about what's in them. Guy has helpfully put in the chat function there where the guides can be downloaded, so you can see for yourself. But we thought it might be useful understanding the authorship and reviewers of each of the 3 guides that Sarah was just talking about. So the first guide, the Carbon Primer, was developed in-house by myself and Andrea with the reviewer Nicole Sullivan, who's involved a lot in the embodied carbon space, which is mainly applicable to the built environment. The other author was Fabiano Ximenez, who's a senior research scientist with the New South Wales Department of Primary Industry. So he really brings the forestry side of things into the equation there. He's a qualified forester and a long time senior scientist at the end of life of wood products, as well as the processing and forestry side of things. So we had a good mix of skills there in the authorship and the reviewer. The second guide, which is more of the policy guide for government stakeholders, that was the primary author of that was Fabiano. And this guide itself is a second edition of a very popular guide that was done over 10 years ago under the Greenhouse Gas Accounting Development Authority. So it's really a second edition of that, and it's proved very popular with policymakers. That is informed by us as well, but that was reviewed by senior forest scientists, academics, and natural resource economists. So you can sort of see there we're bringing in a range of reviewers that are more applicable to that forestry and landscape sector. The third guide, the technical guide, again, developed in-house from our skills in-house and our experience, myself and Andrea, who's now unfortunately left us. She's with Laminex Australia as a sustainability manager. But that was reviewed by individual building design professionals from Lend-Lease, Arup and Oricon, with input again from the Australian Forest Products Association. So you can sort of see there, we're trying to make sure we can't cover all the bases here within ThinkStep, so we call on experts in other areas to make these credible information. So what's in the guides? Well, you can see there that the terms in the primer and glossary, from the carbon cycle to substitution effects, carbon accounting and whole of buildings, and a glossary, which those terms that Sarah is referring to as one source of truth for these sort of terms. So we gathered information from a range of standards, as well as recent methodologies that are being developed by the Green Building Council, neighbours, and other sources within Australia and overseas. And importantly for the members, we also made sure that we made them aware, as you can see on the right side there, that the other guides are existing. So we're informing the members of FWPA that these other two guides, the different audiences are out there. And so the members of FWPA who might be selling wood into the market, they're aware of these other resources and they can have access to those as well. Within the carbon primer and glossary, we've prepared a range of infographics which explain the carbon cycle of softwood and plantations, as well as native forestry. They have slightly different carbon cycles and different players in the industry. So it's a way we graphically represent those two sectors of the Australian timber and forestry industry. And we illustrate them in a circular fashion because the carbon is being emitted at some stages and reabsorbed and stored, as Sarah was talking about before. So it's very much a circular story for the carbon cycle for these sort of products. Importantly, it's not just about the Australian timber industry, but the FWPA represents importers of timber. Now, we couldn't cover the whole forestry sector for every country in the world we import timber from, but it was important that people understand that there is a carbon footprint to imported timber products, but that really much relates to the forestry sector in the country of origin where the timber is harvested. For the most part, we import a lot of timber that has a very good carbon footprint, but there are some sources that the footprint is very high. So we're pointing people towards those sources. And when the next update comes in, we might have some more information about those footprints of those sectors, those sources of imported timber. And again, the glossary of carbon, which is very important definitions there. The second guide, the policy document, that's the range of contents there. It's more landscape-wide issues that policymakers, people deciding what the forestry and plantation policies are in Australia, and how carbon gets accounted for. It's a very complex picture for outsiders, but people in the forestry and plantation sector, this sort of brings together all those different areas of interest that really affect forestry and plantations across the landscape rather than looking at individual products. So that's what we brought to the table there. Again, infographics, and you can sort of see from the makeup of the guide there, this is more about landscape issues. It's about the carbon across the whole native forestry estate, the working forestry estate, and the plantations that mainly softwood plantations that are within Australia. It presents the figures based on really good references, credible references about the total carbon stored, for example, in native forestry, different types of forests. You can see there's a large variation in the amount of carbon stored in the different forest types, as well as pointing to the future. So wood and bio-based products. So there's a lot of work going on in the bio-based product space to replace fossil fuel-based products. So it's pointing to the future as well. Now, the third guide, which I'll talk a bit more in detail, is more for the building and design professionals. And Sarah was talking in her presentation a bit more about that and how the cubic meter of softwood stores approximately 0.9 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents, and hardwood is more because it's a denser product. So this contents here, similar to the other two guides, but different. You see the glossary of carbon terms down the bottom there. We've reused those glossary from the primer, so you can sort of see how we've reused different elements from the different guides, but tailored them more to the building and design professional industry. We've reused the carbon cycle for softwood and hardwood plantations there as well. So people are getting a similar message, but more tailored towards these building and design professionals. And it includes definitions around embodied carbon, the greenhouse gas emissions from the materials that go into a project. We include definitions of upfront carbon, which are more to do with the emissions from the production of the product and its involvement in the building process itself. I'm not going to go into detail about those. We include definitions about fossil carbon emissions as opposed to biogenic carbon uptake, the storage of carbon in the wood, and the emissions of CO2 during processing. And together they add up to a total product carbon footprint in terms of carbon dioxide equivalent values. As Sarah was saying, about 50, well, not about, but pretty precisely, weirdly enough, 50% of the dry weight of wood is composed of carbon, the element carbon. Now, obviously, there's some water there. So when we talk about the dry weight of wood, that's after the moisture's removed. And that attribute of timber, and if the timber is from a sustainably harvested source, that that carbon can be stored in the building for the long term. So the CO2 is absorbed by the tree, the carbon is in the wood, and the carbon in the wood is stored in the building over the long term. So you can sort of see how the CO2 is essentially stored in the building. And we've included some numbers in this particular guide around the biogenic carbon emissions other than CO2, the biogenic CO2 uptake. You can sort of see there, minus 900 kilos of CO2 is stored in the wood, a cubic meter of Australian softwood in this example, but there is a fossil emission from various parts of the production cycle. And so the guide includes these numbers, which people can then use in their environmental assessments if they're using wood in place of other products that might emit more fossil carbon emissions during their production. And that's essentially how, and the guide itself pulls these together. So that last diagram I showed you was from the Environmental Product Declaration for Australian softwood. So we illustrate in our guide how this data can be used in a whole of building assessment to reduce the embodied carbon footprint of a building. Okay, so there is a design aspect to the guide that is very useful for building and design professionals. And it's fantastic to see case studies such as T3 in Collingwood, just being completed in Victoria, where the embodied carbon footprint of the project has been demonstrated to show a 34% reduction of embodied carbon. Okay, so there's 3 case studies in the guide. This is the latest one that's just been completed. So that's reduced 47,400 tons of CO2 equivalent compared to what the building could have been built out by using a lot more timber. So you can sort of see from the guide we've got the background and the tools and the information that people can use to make their case for using timber in building and construction for this particular guide. And we've also got some guidance there on how these can be used in green building and infrastructure rating schemes, as well as the developing methodology around neighbours, which applies in Australia and New Zealand, where it is requiring an embodied carbon footprint to, and that methodology is being developed at the moment. So I might just hand over to Sarah now to talk about how the guides are being used.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So we've actually made all three of these guides available for download for free. They're published on our Forest and Wood Products Australia website and also on our Wood Solutions website. And we've been promoting those through our social media channels as well. I think just from the number of downloads and just anecdotal feedback that we've already had a very positive response to the guides, and they're being used and downloaded. I think from late last year on the Wood Solutions website, we've had around 300 downloads and around 200 from the FWPA website just when we started promoting them in early February. So they are starting to gain some traction, and we know that they're already helping to inform our industry's dialogue around carbon and forestry. And I think the main feedback that we've had from our members is they're just so grateful for that reliable resource that is the single source of truth, as I mentioned. So I think knowing that the information here has been researched, it's been validated, gives us a greater level of comfort when we're trying to communicate about a very complex topic. So if our industry can understand it better, hopefully, we can educate our stakeholders. But just a few different ways that the guides are being used. They are being used in advocacy work. So the industry representatives from the forest and wood products industry are using the guides to educate themselves, to check facts, and the information from the guides is being used in presentations to various state timber industrial ministerial roundtables, for example, or just in briefings with government departments and state ministers. And the aim there is obviously to just increase policies that favour the use of forest and wood products. It's also being used to help educate the design and build industry. FWPA and Wood Solutions works with most of the associations in building, surveying, architecture, engineering. So this information is actually being used to develop content for the Wood Solutions program. We deliver a number of webinars and seminars to make sure that that information is disseminated and freely available. So it just allows us to provide that expert advice for anyone that wishes to work with wood and understand how it can have those environmental benefits. And, we're hoping through that, to create that new generation of architects, designers and engineers, and to take this information into, the next generation. It's also just being more broadly used in marketing and communications. I know our team here at FWPA love these guides. We go to them daily when we need information to develop either advertising campaigns or just content for social media, videos, presentations. And we're also finding that our members that work in marketing and comms are also finding that really valuable. And being able to have that credible and authoritative voice in this space is incredibly important when you're representing your company. Oh, sorry, did you
No, I was just saying.
Oh, no, sorry, I thought you were going to say something as well.
No, I just thought we might sort of answer some questions now, Sarah, because I
yeah,
think
sure, yeah,
if that's okay, because we've got a couple of questions.
We've got a couple coming through.
Yeah, so thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
It's really good to see, as one of the authors, one of them, it's really good to see them being used and engaged, people engaging with them.
Yeah, it's been great so far. So, and it's early days still of promoting them. So
Yeah, great. So please send your questions through. If we can't get to them today, we'll get back to you separately, but please send any questions you've got through about the guides or some technical information. That's fine. I've got a question here from, I understand carbon in different timber products would vary from softwood to hardwood and everything in between. Is there a reputable source to find the carbon content of various timber products? I might answer that one if that's okay, Sarah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the environmental product declarations I was mentioning in the technical guide, they're independently verified information. So that will provide the carbon content of various timber products. And you're correct in saying that the carbon stored in hardwood will be greater per cubic meter because it's a denser material than softwood. The ratio still stands 50% of the dry weight of wood, but because it's a denser material, a given cubic meter of hardwood will hold more. A product like particle board, which has a resin content and is softwood, will hold less per cubic meter of biogenic carbon. But yeah, those EPDs are really where you'll be looking at there. So send any questions through. Sarah, oh, that's not a question from Julio. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing these amazing guides. That's really nice to hear.
Yeah, thank you.
Are you using, I understand you use some of the content in social media, is that correct?
Yes, so FWPA has actually also just extracted some of the key takeaways from the guides, and we've developed some social media tiles. You can see them there on the slide. This has just made it easier for our industry to share, and also just, the attention span on social media is, 1 nanosecond. So we've tried to, again, just the guides aren't that long. They're not that cumbersome to read through, but just so you're giving some quick snippets and information and piquing people's interest so that they can go to the website and read for further information. So they've been quite useful, and we've just got a little social media digital toolkit on our website that members can download for free and share as well. So that's been really useful.
Right. Okay. One other question that we have is if there's anything you'd do differently if you did these guides again, or when you would update them, what would you do differently?
Oh, I think it's really important just to make sure, I think, internally that you're aligned, and I think it can also, you can have too much feedback. So I think it's really important to set from the very beginning at the project, who is going to have input, and making sure I guess you cut off at a certain point to allow feedback, but then you need to kind of just cut that off and make sure that the project keeps ticking along. I think that can draw out the process, and you can have too many people with too many voices coming in. So it's important that you get that that feedback and that input. But I think just making sure that doesn't roll on forever. You really need to set those timelines and guidelines about who's going to be involved and how long they've got to actually deliver their feedback. That would be helpful right from the beginning, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's good finding. One more question for you, and we'll just have time for one more question. We'll get back to everybody else separately. That's okay. Is FWPA finding that architects, specifiers are surprised by the positive carbon storing capacity of timber?
Yeah, I think they are. I think particularly around the fact that the carbon stays stored in that wood product for the life of the product or the building. I think that is still a surprise to many people, and I know it was to me before I joined this industry. So, yeah, I think that's probably been the biggest surprise. But and that's where it's great, because, as I said before, we do have quite a positive story to tell here. So we're just making sure that that message does get out there loud and clear. And they understand when they're specifying the timber, that the value, as I said, that it can have if you are working on a sustainable development and you're looking for those points. Timber is a great material to include for those reasons.
Yeah, and I think it's always important to emphasize that that timber storage, provided it comes from a sustainable harvested source, so a well-managed plantation, responsibly managed native forest, that's when the sustainability and the storage aspect is really strong.
Yeah, exactly.
Which fortunately most of the timber we're getting and using is, but there are exceptions. So Sarah, I think we might end there. We're just a couple of minutes over time. So thanks everybody for staying with us. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much, Sarah, for sharing your
Thanks for having
experience
me.
and knowledge there.
Thanks everyone for their questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you everybody, and have a good afternoon.
Take care. Bye.
We have many more webinars on our website on a whole host of sustainability topics. Visit us at thinkstep-anz.com.